Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, August 1978. Dead of summer in New York City. Hot, sticky, smelly. But maybe, just maybe, a little less sticky and smelly because this was the start of New York City's so-called pooper scooper law. Basically a law that says, hey, you, pick up after your damn dog. When they poop on the sidewalk, you are now responsible for picking it up and disposing of it. This, I'm sure, was welcome news to the residents of New York City, not to mention the manufacturers of those little plastic bags you have to carry with you on the leash. And then you take it out and you turn it inside out and you pick up the poop, which has always struck me, I gotta say, if I'm being honest, I still find that pretty disgusting. Like, I still technically think that counts as touching poop.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm right. Niki is a dog owner, so she can describe to us or maybe defend the practice, but maybe that's the reason I don't own a dog. It's like just that. Even that is like, oh, really? But anyway, here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Let's talk about scooping poop. Hello there.
Hello, Jody. And this will be my comment. You're both parents. You have touched more poop in your lifetime than I ever will with my dog.
That's very good.
And you don't even get to use a little bag,
true.
right? Like, you just got to go in.
It's just like a wet wipe.
No, it's true, but something about it just really, But of course, the whole point of this conversation is compared to what, right? And compared to, and so I guess we start there, right? And it's funny. I mean, I will say that this is a fun episode. It was recommended to us actually by a listener, Adam, who sent us a note that was like really nice suggestion and obviously a little silly, but, does tie into actually even the previous episode we did about law and order and sort of feeling of safety in New York City streets. Obviously, the Bernie Goetz story, much more intense than this, but it is that era in New York. The same mayor, Ed Koch, kind of trying to navigate this. But I think it's important to point out, as I said, compared to what? I went on Twitter and wrote a message saying, does anyone, remember the pre-pooper scooper law era? Was there just like dog shit everywhere? Did it smell terrible? And, a lot of people responded and said, well, there's still dog shit everywhere, which we'll talk about how effective this law is. But yes, people responded and were like, yeah, like it was just kind of wild that people would just let their dogs poop and just keep it moving. So I don't know if either of you want to kind of help describe, help paint that picture or that smell.
Can I just say, this is not, maybe it's related, I'm not sure, but I remember taking a class. I was a TA for Kenneth Jackson's The History of the City of New York. I think you did that. Yeah, I think you did that with me, Niki. And he brought in a guest professor who was talking about sort of like the city and the history of public health. And he said a statistic that I never forgot. And it was that during the 19th century, horses pooped so much that they raised the level of the street by 2 feet.
Wow.
And I was like, what? And then the whole idea of like a brownstone with steps that lead up to your house was because the poop and the excrement was just so much that, people had to have elevated places where they lived. And I was so grossed out by that. I was like, what? Poop 2 feet? What?
Yeah.
So, yeah, when I think about dogs, which are somewhat like the horses of the 19th century, it is gross. I'm not going to lie. But I've also had a dog before. And listen, you got to do it. You just got to do it.
You absolutely do. It actually reminds me. So first of all, I should say that, Kellie, that was the exact example that I thought of too. I was like, you want to see shit in the streets? Take a time machine back to like the early 1900s, and you will see
and
your
dead
fill.
Horses too on the side.
No, it's terrible. Oh. So this seems like small ball in comparison to that. But of course, I mean, this is the same period, at least, where you have like anti-littering campaigns. This idea that you would just like leave stuff out in the street. There was this real tragedy of the commons thing where people just saw public space as kind of the world is my trash can. And dog poop fits right into that. But I do think, Jody, in response to your idea that this ties in so closely to the last episode about New York in the 1970s, I think in two ways it does. One, there were a lot more dogs in New York City in the 1970s because people were getting dogs to protect them from break-ins and crime and things like that. But at the same time, you also have this, like, the city's in such decline, and there are so many people who want to save it. And one of the ways that they want to save it is they're like, okay, well, we can make this city nicer by. And the pooper scooper law is like one of those efforts.
Right. And I think that's actually important to point out that this law is like an incremental step. It's another key moment, but it's a moment in a long kind of like war and series of efforts against this. It's not like this is the first time it occurred to anyone that dogs shouldn't just be shitting everywhere, right? And so, to your point, Niki, I think like right before this law goes into effect, there's another big effort through the 70s by a lot of local activists. I've read this name. Fran Lee is a local activist who's come up a number of times in the reporting around this, who had an organization called Children Before Dogs. And the Times described her organization in 72 as easily the most persistent anti-dog dirt lobby in existence. Look, maybe I'm stereotyping here, but I feel like I know exactly who Fran Lee is and exactly how she speaks at your local city council board meeting or whatever. But nevertheless, she is out there, and her solution, right, is not pick up after your dog, but it is more this idea of, if your dog's going to poop, where should it poop? And where does it poop? It poops into the
gutter. Cut out the middleman.
The sewer,
which then gets washed away in the rain or by the sanitation department or whatever. And I learned in looking at this that this is where the phrase, right, curb your dog, comes from. That you take your dog to the curb and encourage it to poop off the edge of the curb, rather than in the sidewalk, which I suppose is better. But even that, I guess, is not enough. And so the pooper scooper idea comes into play.
It makes sense to me if a dog poops in the grass, because I feel like it's fertilizer, or, just sort of, but like go back into the earth. But like the curb, even the curb to me is not sufficient, because I just feel like it's still on the sidewalk. It still smells. It's still, you could still step in it. I don't know. I don't know that that's a solution either.
I can imagine, this kind of perfect world where dogs are so well trained that they can go over to the sewer grate and do all their business there. That's just not reality.
No.
Like, when your dog is going to go, your dog is going to go. You can curb them in New York City. I raised my dog in New York City, and over time, you can get them to get used to, okay, this is where I go. I like step off the sidewalk. I poop in the street. You pick it up, and then you move on with your day, and there are trash cans all around. So it's very easy to manage. But you just dogs are going to go where they're going to go. Right. And that's why you need a plan B.
Well, at some level, it's kind of like a realization that it's going to be easier to train humans than it is going to be to train dogs, right? And so, in theory, right? And so we have to get the humans to scoop up the poop. And so, the law, as it goes into effect, it's the New York State Public Health Law 1310. Though there is some interesting stuff about city law versus state law, and there's some places that seem to fall through the cracks. We'll get into whether that even matters. But it is Law 1310, which, among other things, states, quote, "It shall be the duty of each dog owner to remove any feces left by his dog on any sidewalk, gutter, street, or other public area." Now, I'm sure the Fran Lees of the world have really dug into the language there because, for instance, Kellie, your point about, well, if it poops in a little flower bed, what does that count as? Public area or private area? And I would say, I don't know whose side I'm taking here, but to point out, I do think that building owners or people who own places, it is a tragedy of the commons thing that everyone thinks oh, my dog it's fine, it's a little pee or a little poop on this thing. And then if you were to sit there outside of your building, you'd probably see 100 dogs a day take a crap in your flower bed. And that's probably not very healthy for your plants and so forth. And so, it is just on aggregate.
And the pee can kill the plants too.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting the world together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
I had a friend in New York whose dog was best friends with my dog, and she recounted the story of like her dog was like really liked to pee in this one like roped off area around a tree, and there was a woman who was like constantly watching, and every time her dog stepped into that little box, up goes the window, and she just starts yelling. It's like, you can't curb your dog there. And there are little signs all over the place that are like, don't curb your dog in the flower bed or in the tree area. It actually does hurt the trees, and it does hurt the flowers. I have a real pack in, pack out philosophy. Like, you clean up after your dog wherever they go.
Right. Yeah, and they have, the dog industry now, there's so many like those plastic bags that are attached to the leash. Yeah. You just pull one off, throw it every block, at the corner of every block is a trash can. And, you dump it, you keep it moving.
Yeah. No, it's not that hard, and I think it probably doesn't say much about humans and their laziness that they actually just can't do that very simple thing, but it is the place where I think we should kind of start to wrap up, but I think is the most interesting thing here is that kind of this is one of those classic situations of like, you can put a law in the books, but what really we're talking about is a sort of cultural norm, right? And personal responsibility and other ways in which people are sort of incentivized or disincentivized from doing things. You mentioned, all the people putting up little signs, and, I don't know if those are more effective than the law, but by all accounts, there is a fine that you can get for this, but by all accounts, not many people get fines for this. It's more, and I will refer back to the original email we got from our listener, Adam, who talked about kind of this is maybe a chance to talk about an Overton window shifting. The Overton window being the kind of like outer bounds of what's acceptable. And really that's what this law, in theory, when it works, does, is it doesn't just create a bunch of enforcement, but it just creates this notion that it is now forbidden to let your dog poop on the street and not do anything about it. And that's a cultural thing more than it is a legal thing.
I don't know if anyone's been like, man, I had to pay $250 for not picking up poop. Like, I don't know anyone's been ticketed for that, but I will, it's frowned upon. People will walk by me like, hey, pick that up. Like, it's not, I think, the public kind of polices itself in terms of making sure that people don't, break the rules.
Yeah, it's very much a shame-based law. But I think that a good evidence of the cultural nature of this is that during the pandemic, things broke down. There was more trash on the street, there were more rats on the street, and there was a lot more dog poop on the street. And I think that actually encouraged people to stop picking up after their dogs. They're like, well, nobody else picks up after their dog. Like, why would I do it? And you start to see a kind of tip over into not taking responsibility because there isn't this community ethos behind it. And so there has to be a like resetting of the norms to get everything up and running the way that it was again.
Yeah, I think this is further evidence. And there are stats that show kind of 311 complaints went through the roof. And I think anyone who's just lived in New York City saw like that there was a lot more poop on the street. I certainly noticed it. I think it's evidence, to me that like, I just think for understandable reasons, like we just forgot how to live with each other for a while in the pandemic, and we're just figuring that out. And I think that's across the board.
Or just thought the end was near.
Right, exactly.
The end was near.
And,
you want to be picking up dog poop in the apocalypse?
Right. In ways big and small, and also like ways that, have very different kinds of consequences. But like, like traffic deaths are way up. I think part of it is people just forgot how to drive. It's not that we're more or whatever, that enforcement is, although I would say traffic is another interesting one where it's like, I actually do think like consistent enforcement does play a role in a way that maybe the fine threat in this doesn't, but a lot of it is just cultural. Do you just kind of live your life knowing that there are other people around you? And I just think the pandemic in so many ways kind of took that away, and you're seeing it in all sorts of ways, big and small, including this one. Do we have any other thoughts about the kind of like the moment that this went into effect? We talked about Ed Koch being a mayor who had to grapple with all of this kind of, let's call it pre-broken windows questions about the state of the subway, the graffiti, the poop on the street, and then obviously like bigger things like vigilante justice and so forth and crime. But this was like a real thing, and I think Ed Koch couldn't pass a law to take care of subway vigilantism, but he could pass this law. And I think this is one of the things that was like very, he was very keen on taking that stand.
Well, I think aesthetics matter. I think when people walk into a city, when tourists come to New York City, and if the complaint is, gosh, there's poop everywhere, or it smells, or there's, trash everywhere, or however people experience the city, there is an aspect of, one, public health, but also just general beautification, like just like tidiness that I think goes into city planning. And so it's a way of having a sense of pride about your city to some extent. Maybe that's a very superficial way of thinking about it, but like, I've been to some places and I've been like, wow, this subway is so clean, this, park is so nice. There's no trash or whatever. It gives you a different vibe, and it also makes you want to maintain that state.
Well, and I think that it also speaks to the health of the community. It's like one of those signs that the community cares, like the people care about the area around them, that they feel an investment in the area around them, that they know one another and so feel a responsibility to one another. And I don't know that you get that community building through broken windows policing and then you like create the community out of that. But it is a sign of the health of the community and to a certain extent the resources of the community, whether you're able to do this kind of upkeep and whether people care enough to do it.
And yes, and I think, on all sorts of things, it's the real authentic and sustainable way to get there is to have people feel invested in their community and feel like their lives, that they can contribute to the health of their community. And that has all sorts of ramifications, big and small, including, in this moment, there is now a push again to, I would say, do messaging around pooper scoopers, and there's now, we'll tweet these out I guess, but there's some new displays and posters, and I think the messaging is the sign is, the poster says don't leave shit on the sidewalk. The S and the H are obscured by a dog pooping, but very clearly very 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 like straightforward, don't leave shit on the sidewalk. We love New York City. The Department of Sanitation signs all over the city. I think we're starting to see an effort to kind of change that norm once again. All right, Niki, dog owner, you're the final. You get the final word here. Any other dog etiquette that you want to hop on your soapbox and talk about?
I think that dog etiquette comes around from all different, like people asking to pet a dog, I think is really important, especially like training your children. If we're going to do children before dogs, train your children to ask before they touch a dog. Yes. And then, I don't know, like keep things clean. It was really, really hard, like raising a dog in a city where there were like chicken bones all over the street. Yeah. It's so much easier when that's not the case. So again, like building good, strong, caring communities helps everyone, and it helps our puppies too.
All right. All right. Well, that is a great note to end it on. That could be your platform for running for me. You could be the next Ed Koch, is what I'm trying to say.
Look, Nala is going to be a central part of whatever political platform I run on.
All right. Well, that's great. We'll leave it there. And thanks again to Adam for suggesting this, and keep sending in suggestions for episodes, folks. But Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Supervisor Milk took to the grassy lawn at Dubose Park this afternoon to publicize the new law. Under the ordinance, dog lovers who don't clean up can be fined.
I think what happened is what happened in New York, that people use their own ingenuity, their own ideas, their own concepts. Some people are using their pie tins, some people are using the Wall Street Journal, and other people are using doggy doos and shovels.
Milk put his foot down to emphasize that the city intends to enforce, and you guessed it, in Supervisor Milk's words, this really is the bottom line.
Radiotopia.